To wrap up this lesson, we're going to take a moment and have you reflect on your learning and how some of the things that we did this week helped you build your knowledge around the things that motivated or caused people to join World War I. So in your notebook, write a brief but brilliant response, kind of reflecting on how the different types of evidence that we looked at or used, or any author would use in general, but how do different types of evidence, facts, statistics, first-person accounts, definitions, brief explanations, argumentative claims or opinions, how do those different types of evidence build your knowledge of reasons for joining World War I? So how do they help you understand why people chose to do what they did versus staying at home and trying to be safe and avoid potential death, basically. All right, a deep dive for this unit is, or this lesson, I won't say unit, this lesson is a continuation of the deep dive that we did in the last one, where we're talking about avoiding redundancies. This one we're trying to eliminate wordiness and redundancies. So if you see here, I've got, it looks a little weird. I've got 2 A's, 2 B's, and 2 C's, but these are my pairs, my groupings. So I thought it would be a little easier if I put them this way. Basically, between my groupings, you're going to try to figure out which sentences are clearer. And this is whether it might involve a redundancy or changing word order or just eliminating excessive words. Sometimes just because you have a longer sentence doesn't necessarily mean that you have a better sentence. Sometimes longer sentences work. Sometimes it's just overkill. And one of the things I think that we do for you guys as writers, as we teach you from the early stages of writing, and I'm talking about like writing responses or essays, when we give you scripts, we kind of, one, make writing very boring that way, but two, we put it in your head that writing should always be, especially when it comes to responses and analysis and essays, that there is a formula to follow. Well, I hate to tell you, we kind of lie to you. Well, I won't say we, because I don't teach youngins, those youngins, but and I don't mind it, because you got to start somewhere. And if you've never written before and you don't really understand analysis or essay writing, we've got to start you somewhere. It's just, unfortunately, when we put this in your head, we think that that's the way that you have to write every time. So this idea that paragraphs always have to have 3 to 5 sentences, not true. Or the idea that an essay has to be 5 paragraphs, not true. It comes down to really you being able to write precisely and concisely. That was one of the big focuses as one of your deep dives. But this idea of quality versus quantity. If you can effectively write and complete the task like you did on the last one, where you only really needed 2 paragraphs minimum, and you did it brilliantly, then who's to say that that's not a quality piece? You know what I mean? So I'm not saying that you should always abandon the 5-paragraph essay. I'm just saying I want you to get in the habit of, when you're evaluating your writing and editing your writing and maybe even pre-planning to write, you're really looking at who's your audience, what's your task, what's your purpose, and what's your end game here. You know, like, why are you writing, but what is it that you want people to get out of it? And when you can do that, I think then we can get into this, out of this habit of wordiness. I have a hard time of eliminating wordiness just from when I talk. Writing, not a problem. So I want you to look at these pairs, and you can call it 1A, 2A, 1B, 2B. I don't care. But I want you to look at these, and then you try to come up with why the sentences that you picked is more clear. So the first grouping is the first A, enlisting as a soldier in World War I is something many young Canadian men wanted to do, or many young Canadian men wanted to enlist in World War I. So to you, when you read it and you hear it, which one do you think is more clear or is clearer? And then why? The why is a big piece here. Don't just choose one and then just say because. There has to be a reason for it. Your B grouping, soldiers had to run and race through the battlefields. Soldiers had to dash through the battlefields. And then your C groupings, the British male teenagers who enlisted as boys were not old enough to vote. And then the British male teenagers weren't old enough to vote. And that really should be a period, not a question. I'm just not going to go back and fix it at this moment. So that is a period, not a question. So hopefully you picked something, kind of help you give some ideas here. In the first sentence pair, the second sentence is clearer because the subject is short and it completes the action of the sentence. Also, the first sentence of the first pair is not as clear because it starts with a phrase that makes the subject unclear, so we don't know really who we're talking about until we kind of get to the end, and even then it's questionable. So that's why A, in the A grouping, the second one is better. In the second pair, the words run and race mean the same thing. So there's redundant. We could just take care of it, eliminate it, use one, or go to the B one and change it all together and put in dash. It gets the point across just as well, and even kind of gives a word that maybe you don't use as often, so you've already elevated your writing right then and there. And then in that third pair, teenagers let us know that they were still young, so we don't need who enlisted as boys in the first one because it's just restating the same idea. So wordiness and confusion in A, and redundancies with run and race in B, and again redundancies in C. So hopefully you picked the right ones. All right, we're going to look at this passage. It's a passage. I've typed up a passage there, and I want you're going to still in this quest for eliminating wordiness and redundancies, try to figure out how this piece that I've got written here in the first bullet point, how it can be revised in order to eliminate wordiness and redundancies. So in the passage from page 3, Smith talks about what happened to the teenagers who survived the trenches. Those who survived the trenches and came home brought memories that retained the power to haunt until the end of their lives. And that comes from page 3. Hence the parenthetical note. If you don't know what that is, where it's got the parentheses and the 3, that's a parenthetical note telling you that I took it from page 3 of the Smith document. So if you're not sure how we could revise this so that we could eliminate wordiness and redundancies, let's kind of talk through it. You got in these sentences, I can clearly see that the page number is repeated twice. I said in the passage from page 3, and then I have that parenthetical note. So I've already listed twice where you're getting the information. That's a repetition. Get rid of it. Get rid of one. So technically, when you're reciting from a source, I only need to list the page number once. So I'm either going to put it like I've written it or use the parenthetical note. Actually, in this one, the author already includes it in the text citation. So that parenthetical note, since it's already there, I'm going to get rid of in the passage from page 3. I'm just going to say Smith talks about, eliminate it. Also, if you see in the passage where it's got survive the trenches, it's repeated as well. So the author tries to introduce the quotation, but his or her, whoever Smith is, his or her introduction basically tells us exactly what the quotation does. So I'd eliminate most of the introductory sentence and rewrite it to signal its importance. So something like, Smith demonstrates the emotional horrors of war. Those who survived the trenches and came home brought memories that retained the power to haunt until the end of their lives. And then keep parenthetical 3. And then now my introductory sentence